Okay. All right, great. So good evening, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to officially adjourn the meeting of the Union Pier Advisory Committee, and just want to make notice that public notice has been given and all the requirements for the Freedom of Information Act have been met for this meeting. We have a couple of committee members joining us online, and we have, of course, a public link so that members of the public can watch. And the agenda for the evening is up, and so we'll go ahead and get started. We may have one more person join us from the committee. So tonight, I just want to welcome everybody again. It's nice to see everyone, and I think we all met last time, so we don't need to go through our introductions again. We just wanted to briefly go over the charge that we came up with, or that we all agreed upon at the last meeting. We figured it's always good to start these committee meetings with going over this charge. And so developing the ground rules for our work, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Reviewing and advising on the community engagement, planning, and design processes. Reviewing and advising on the schedule. Reviewing and advising on the selection of the consultants. Reviewing and advising on the alternative development scenarios, which will of course come later in the process, and engaging with each of your constituencies, those of you all who have constituencies. We also developed and agreed upon the ground rules that are up here about being open, welcoming multiple viewpoints, providing feedback that is both honest and direct, stepping back and sharing speaking time, actively listening, putting your cards on the table, practicing constructive conflict, not being afraid to ask questions while respecting one another, and practicing compassionate accountability and good ethics. So as we move along, I just want to make sure, does anybody have anything they would like to add to our ground rules? Yeah, we did this last time. Okay. So we are going to start by having Robert Somerville with the city, who is joining us online, share a presentation. So it'll take us just one moment to switch over. I think he's over there. Mute in this room.
So Kendra, it's telling me I can't share my screen while the other participant is sharing. All right. Good evening, members of the committee. Kendra, can everybody hear me okay? I hope.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I just have one slide, if you would, and it's just a reminder that we are, this meeting is very serendipitous in that we are kicking off the public engagement component of the Charleston Peninsula Plan. We will actually have our first open house on that project tomorrow. We have another one that's coming up on Thursday, and then we have some focus groups, and I believe members of the committee have been invited as well to those focus groups, the appropriate focus group. So, you know, we're engaging in the Peninsula planning process. As a part of the Peninsula plan, we will be bringing to council. We didn't make the deadline for the September meeting, but that's okay. The work will move forward. But we will be bringing at the first meeting in October an amendment to our consultant contract with Air St. Gross, who is doing the Peninsula Plan consulting work with us. They will also be having added to their scope of work some work around creating what we're currently kind of terming a waterfront redevelopment district for our city plan, for our comprehensive plan. that will engage with the community to determine a vision for how our waterfront areas, specifically at this time, waterfront areas on the peninsula, what is our vision for those as they potentially come up for redevelopment? It will not be, that effort is not limited to the Union Pier site. It would be a future land use category or designation that could be applied to other areas of the peninsula as their current kind of designation maybe goes away as redevelopment is contemplated on those. For instance, the Coast Guard station, we do know that there's going to be some change over there, so that might be a future location. We've been talking about some other areas of the peninsula where ultimately we may want to look at this designation applying to. So it'll be comprehensive, the comprehensive plan in nature, in helping to address how Charleston looks at redevelopment along our waterfront, again, specifically to the peninsula at this time, with the ability to grow later and possibly apply in other areas of our community that have waterfront and potential waterfront redevelopment. So that's where we're at from the planning aspect of the comprehensive plan work and the peninsula plan. I would encourage anyone listening to this, whether they're members of this committee or any members of the public interested in what is happening not only at Union Pier, but on the peninsula, to please try to come out to at least one of these open houses. If you have been invited to any of the breakout or focus group sessions, I would also ask that you please make every effort to attend, or if the invitee is not available, that they have a representative from their organization attend. It's going to be really important for our consulting team and city staff to really hear what people are thinking about, what is our future interaction with water. And this is important during this process. We really are listening. We're not coming in with, as a part of this work, necessarily preconceived notions. We really want to hear from people about what it's like on the peninsula to live with water, and what does that look like going forward as we are working on the plan. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on what we're doing with that effort, but that would be the city planning department's update on where we're at from the comprehensive plan standpoint, as well as the larger effort, which is the Charleston Peninsula Plan, or the successor to the Charleston Downtown Plan from the 1990s.
Okay, Robert, can you hear us?
I can.
Please, Larry has a question.
Thanks, Robert. Just quick question for clarification. The meetings this week, are they more focused on the comp plan land use category, or is it also Peninsula Plan, or is it kind of, you see those working in parallel? Just so I understand how these meetings are going to go and what the priorities are.
Yeah, absolutely, Winslow. So the meetings for this week, they are on both tracks. So we will have a track that's specifically about water and how we live with water and how we will be living with water along our edges into the future. So we will begin to tease out and begin that conversation that really will impact what the comprehensive plan part of the discussion is. But also looking at land use patterns, design ideas for future redevelopment in the neck and the Upper Peninsula area, and the other elements of the Peninsula Plan itself. So it really is a comprehensive effort that would include starting the groundwork on the comprehensive plan amendment, as well as the opening engagement for the Peninsula Plan.
Vince?
Just following up on that, you have the two meetings this week. When do you envision a second set of meetings after people get a chance to orient what they've learned from the first meetings? When do you see that happening?
So I don't know that we've actually set the next date in stone. I believe we are looking at, and I apologize, I'm trying to look at what the schedule I have here. And I think so we have this week, we're doing these open houses that are open to everyone. And then we do have some meetings where we've specifically asked subject matter experts to come and have conversations with us as well during this week. The consultant team is going to take that information, what they hear, and then we're going to do some report outs and some validation checks. I believe that's in about a 30-day turnaround period after the meetings, with some additional engagement that will then be happening rest of, well, I think this is the engagement for September, then some additional engagement that'll be happening in October and into November.
Thank you. I assume then also that you will take into consideration when you're looking at this water plan, specifically what happened during Idalia and the consequences of all of that for those neighborhoods that are close to the water.
I'm absolutely sure Dale and the water plan team will be looking at that. The comprehensive plan is kind of a higher level, more general effort for the waterfront districts. And then the peninsula plan is a higher level, kind of very general direction plan for the peninsula as a whole, and looking at the overall transportation network and other things. It will be informed by the water plan, but the water plan itself will be looking at, kind of those specific nuances of storm events and those kinds of things. And we'll be capturing some of that information as a part of the peninsula plan. And Dale will talk about the water plan next.
I apologize, I'm not trying to monopolize this, but when you use the word higher level, could you say a little bit more about higher level and what that would mean when you're presenting a plan?
Yeah, so I mean, for planning, we typically say the 10,000 foot level. So the peninsula plan is looking at things from so the comprehensive plan looks holistically at the whole city. The peninsula plan then takes that down a notch and looks very specifically at the peninsula. But again, we're looking at the peninsula kind of as a whole and as a system, not necessarily, to a level of like a specific neighborhood water project. We're going to be looking at systematic issues around transportation, water, and other things, but we're not going to get granular to the necessarily in the peninsula plan to, recommendations that are specific to like any particular street or even neighborhood. Again, depending on the exact issue. So there may be an issue that's occurring in one neighborhood, but because that domino effect from that neighborhood elsewhere creates a more systemic problem for, say, transportation, gridlock, we may make recommendations about fixing a particular intersection that may come out of our transit or transportation analysis or traffic analysis that's about a specific intersection, for instance. Because it affects such a wider range of areas, there may be additional work that'll come out of the water plans analysis that may do something similar about a particular area of one of the watersheds or drainage basins that then populates to the peninsula plan. But its focus will not be at a level necessarily that will be looking like neighborhood by neighborhood or intersection by intersection. Does that answer for you?
Kind of. I'm sure we'll chat more later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Robert?
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Robert, very much.
So good evening, everyone. Dale Morris, Chief Resilience Officer, City of Charleston. Robert Summer, just talked a little bit about comprehensive plan of the city. And we have a comprehensive integrated water plan, and they're shortchanged from comp plan. So I'm going to talk about the comprehensive water plan. And what Robert meant was the water plan team, this work has been underway for a little over a year. About a year right now, actually. It'll wrap up towards the end of this year, beginning of next year. There'll be a set of recommendations. We probably have 100 of them already. We're looking for 25 years. So that's the comprehensive water plan. And then I'll talk a little bit about future water levels, because that's related to the Army Corps of Engineers project, as you know, perimeter protection. And then I'll talk about the scope of work that was just approved by City Council for the water plan team to do additional work on Union Pier. And so Winslow and others were asking me early on, can we have the water plan team do work for Union Pier? And I said no. And I said no simply because the water plan team's mandate was the entire city, and the budget would not allow them to do additional work. They're already doing a bunch of work for us, not for free, but they're doing a lot of work. So we discussed having an additional source of funding for the water plan team to do the work for Union Pier, and that's what we've moved through, so that's good, but that's the context of all this. So, start with the water plan, our comprehensive integrated water plan. This was a recommendation from the Dutch Dialogues team. The city needs to do it, the comprehensive water plan, look forward, understand what current and future water levels look like, all types of water. So, storm surge, tidal, rainfall, riverine, we have a few riverine floodplains in the city, groundwater, compound flooding, and then what does sea level rise mean for all that? So we have all of those challenges here. So it's a lot, right? But we're trying to have a plan for a proactive, aspirational, achievable vision for the city and its relationship with water. There's a lot of work that's been done in bits and pieces around the city. We're integrating those things and we're doing our own analysis. Let me back up here. The water plan team is really a stellar team. It consists of Black and Beach, which is the prime. That's a heavy civil engineering company, Springfield Tunnels, Concord Streets, the East Calhoun tunnels. So really no heavy civil infrastructure. Work in the city, they're local. Wider and Ball, that's the urban design team. My co-partners in the Dutch Dialogues process, they work around the US on sensitive urban design with water. Biohabitats, natural and nature-based ecological engineering firm. They're based in Baltimore, but their president and CEO happens to live in Charleston, so they're local in some ways. This is a stellar firm. And we have Moffitt & Nichol, which is a prime coastal engineering company. So we have 4 sort of key components of the team, and then we have a number of subs underneath it. So Brockington is part of this, and they do historical. Del Taurus is part of this, and there's the Dutch company, a Dutch research organization. So it's a really good team. They're looking at these things. So we have a 25-year planning horizon. That's really important. The comprehensive plan for the city plan is 10 years. We're looking 25 years ahead. And that's related simply because we need to understand what future water will look like. So our goals in the water plan, again, developed by the water plan team, safety first, flood mitigation and adaptation, equity and access, change for good. Work from the ground up, understand where you are, what Mother Nature gave you, and then build from there. Development often occurs the other way around, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Trying to coordinate across sectors, across stakeholders, and across city departments. This is a whole of government thing. I'm going to show you some maps, and they're necessarily scary, but we want to devise an implementation strategy so we can stay here. Right, so that's the water plan. And again, this is the layered approach. This is the Dutch Dialogues approach. This is the Dutch approach. You start here. You start with what Mother Nature gave you. It's essential. And you build from there. And then you understand sort of what kind of infrastructure you need to have so you can live safely, you can occupy that space. Development often occurs the other way around, like I said, but this is our mechanism, and it's proven to be successful. Our mechanism, I consider myself to be part of the water plan team, even though I'm not. I'm just the project manager for it. So this is sort of very high level, but our landforms in the city, again, types of water, fresh water and salt water, and types of dirt. sand and mud. That's what the city's built upon, and we need to understand that. And we have this, and it's changing, right? This is, as the seas rise, that's gonna change the nature of our mud and sand and of our fresh water and our salt water. And we have this image here from the city plan, the comprehensive plan that Robert spoke about. And in the land and water analysis that underpins that, we talk about, we need to reserve areas both in the low ground and the high ground. I mean, low ground, if we haven't developed anything there yet, and we know it's going to flood, let's not develop there. That encroaches entitlements. You need to be very careful and intentional about that. But we need to allow the marsh, if it's going to go inland, and it wants to, we need to give it space to do that because of all the wonderful things that marsh does for us. And we also don't want to put people at risk where we know they're going to flood in 20 or 25, 30 years. We have to reserve on the high ground because one, that is where people can go. They don't have to move to Somerville. They can just move to high ground. There is high ground in the city of Charleston, right? So we also need to make sure how we reserve the space when rain falls and you're on high ground. Most of our high ground are sandy ridges. Water infiltrates in those ridges and doesn't run off downstream like it does on roads or roofs. So we need to understand that. There's parts of the city we have to defend. We know the peninsula is one of those parts, and I'll show you exactly why in a second. We have to adapt all across these sort of middle zones, right? What is sea level rise? What is additional rainfall? What is the rain bomb we had yesterday? We had 2 inches of rain in 25 minutes yesterday in some parts of the city. That's why it flooded. There's not a pumping system in the world that's big enough to manage that. So we have to sort of adapt and grow and reserve and all these things. And all this, we're going to lose some value in the low ground. We can create some value in the high ground. This is what the water plan team is working on. And it is citywide. It's not just the peninsula. And I put this map up here. We've done sort of natural systems mapping across the city. This is just this is where the good mother nature stuff is. You can see there's a lot of good environment. This is West Ashley, Maryville, Ashleyville, down here on the Stano, Johns Island, right, James Island. There isn't much around the peninsula, and we need to take that into account, right? There isn't much here. Union Pier is down here. There's some on the west side, Wagner Terrace Marshes, and on Laurel Island. But keep that in mind. There isn't much natural nature here, but there is elsewhere. So we're thinking about the peninsula. Keep that in mind. These are the water levels that have been mapped. So the water plan team took the best Army Corps of Engineers information from what's called the South Atlantic Coast Comprehensive Study. This was completed between 2017 and 2021 for the entire Southeast US coast. This is really good modeling. It has compound flood, has coastal flood risk, has inland flood risk, and has compound flood risk when those things occur together. This is some of the best work there is, and they interpolated that information to map this. This is showing what happens in 2050. So here you see the water coming in, encroaching upon the peninsula. The darker the blue, the worse it is. Of course, here's Harleston Village, here's Union Pier, here's Columbus Terminal, here's up here New Market Creek, and you can see the medical district. This is really important information for the community to think about how do we stay here? What do we need to do to go forward? So pretty much the entire peninsula is going to be within the 100-year floodplain in the next number of years. And this is based upon the same 14 inches of sea level rise that we have in the flooding and sea level rise strategy of the city. It was just adopted in 2023. So the water plan team has been thinking about the entire city and sort of the planning areas. The peninsula is one of those planning areas. What do we need to do? We know what we need to do. We knew it when the Dutch dialogue team was here. We need an elevated edge around the peninsula. We need a polder. We need to turn the peninsula into a polder. Polder is a Dutch landform with an elevated edge, and you manage the water inside of it. And it protects you from storm surge and tidal and everything else. We already have bits and pieces of an elevated edge in place, the high battery in Winslow's office, right? But this high battery and the low battery, we're renovating that. That needs to be extended around the peninsula. This is just an image that the design division came up that showed what the Army Corps of Engineers project could look like for peninsula protection if we did it with sensitive design. And if we go forward with the project, we will use sensitive design. There will not be an ugly gray wall on the peninsula. If I have anything to do with this, there will not be an ugly gray wall. And this shows you that not only do you have to manage the tidal and the surge, but you also have to manage the inland water. And all these things apply to Union Pier, and I'm coming to Union Pier in a second. Here's the Army Corps project. We have authority to move forward in the design phase from the federal government and money. We're working with the Army Corps right now on the design agreement to move into the design phase, and then the West City Council for the funding for that. This yellow line is just indicative. It can move and it will move as we go through the design phase. The first phase of design for the Army Corps project is the west side. Why the west side? Because it is actually the most vulnerable part of the peninsula because of the medical district, Harleston Village, property tax values, south of Broad. There's just a lot at risk, so we will start there. Phase 2 should be the batteries, which will be very easy. Phase 3 is the east side. So that's that project moving forward. And I want to talk about this, datums, because it's really important to understand the future maps. So we talk about water elevation in the city, and we use the NOAA mean low, lower water, right? MLLW. That's how we measure and reference tides in the city, water, right? So at 7 foot mean low or lower water, Broad and Lockwood starts to take on water, right? About 7.5 feet, it is now moving across Broad and Lockwood and going down into Harleston Village. There's parts of New Market Creek that start to get up, and we're at 8 foot, then it's even worse. So we talk about mean low or lower water. This Army Corps of Engineers project, we talk about land elevation. So 12 foot NAVD88, is that the same thing? No, it isn't. One key thing to keep in mind. There's 3 feet difference between NAVD88 and mean lower water. So just keep that 3 feet in mind when you're going between the land elevation and the water elevations. Here is Army Corps of Engineers digital elevation mapping of the peninsula and nearby. Showing at 5 foot NAVD88, which is 8 foot 1 mean low water, so that's our major flood level, what occurs, where the water goes. This is not exact, it's pretty close. Again, water could be a half a block elsewhere, but it's actually really good for planning, right? So right now, this is occurring on average 5 times a year. We will exceed it this year. We will probably have 7 or 8 or 9 of these this year. With sea level rise, we are going to have this occurring over 100 times a year. Okay, this is not water in homes. This is water in the streets, disrupting traffic, causing employees not to be able to get to work, and all those other things, right? But this is a lot in the future. We add a foot to that, so now we're at 9 foot 1 mean low water, 6 foot NAVD88. This is almost the exact conditions of Idalia, right? Idalia came in at 9.23. It was a tropical storm on top of a monthly. Right now, this is occurring 2-3 times a decade without an elevated edge. Where this is going to occur 16-20 times a year in the future. I'll submit to you that there's no way this peninsula survives and the activity on the peninsula without an elevated edge. There's no way. Right? People will move, medical district will get tired, they're gonna let employees won't work here, business licenses fees will go down because there won't be so many tourists and other folks living on the peninsula to go to King Street and buy stuff. Without this edge, we're in deep trouble. And here is a 7 foot or a 10-1 mean level water. This is Hurricane Irma levels. This is a little bit higher than Hurricane Irma levels. Right now, it's once a decade, 5 times a year by 2050. This is baked in. So if we're not careful with an elevated edge, we're going to regret it. So now Union Pier falls within the context of that elevated edge. And I went through that to show you that this whole peninsula is at risk, and Union Pier is a part of this puzzle. So just keep that in mind. And Ms. Brian Jenkins, you saw some of this earlier, and I'm sorry to scare you again, but that's it. Now to the water plan team, and this is my last slide. Scope of work for the water plan team. So focus is really on flood risk mitigation for the entire Union Pier area, and then adjacent basins, hydrologic basins, and impacted basins. So this is important because it is so flat over there that the impacted basins and the adjacent basins, that may be an inch or two of elevation difference, so we need to look at the whole area. So it's really probably from Concord Street, the Columbus Terminal south, and probably the French Quarter and north, and probably a little bit further inland. This funding was approved by City Council last week. This is what they're gonna do. So project management, meetings and coordinations with the Riley Center. You'll notice this is primarily internally focused, right, to this team. With the Riley Center, with you all in the advisory group, with a planner that the Riley Center and the port hires, and with the Peninsula Plan team that Robert talked about. What we cannot get in the budget, because we had, certain limited funds, we did not get design support for the team in the charrettes or for public engagement. That is likely to be needed. We'll have to come up with other funding for that, and maybe that's where the Riley Center or others can help. That, we just could not do that. That is expensive work, right? They will do a review and assessment of their previous analysis that Lowe did, Sherwood did, and Thomas and Hunt did of the area, of the port and nearby. They are gonna look very carefully at the 2D H&H modeling that Sherwood and Thomas and Hunt did. So we're gonna look at that. Then they will do their own analysis. So their own coastal and stormwater analysis for Union Pier and nearby basins and impacted basins. They're going to assume that the Army Corps perimeter protection or something like it is in place. Because again, without that edge protection, you don't want to build Union Pier. It's as simple as that. You don't want to put people at risk there. As I showed you, it's blue. It's going to be underwater too much. Unwise to do that without that edge. They will do a conceptual drainage analysis of the pier and nearby basins to understand the sort of target water volumes. How much water do you need to manage? If the water overtops the structure, if it rains too much like it did yesterday, if we got groundwater challenges because you can't get any infiltration, they're gonna do all of that. Make recommendations on locations for that infrastructure. Again, that should set some of the parameters for what goes where for the planning team. And different techniques to manage those volumes. You can add bioswales and green infrastructure in there to help manage the water. You can. That green infrastructure, as I showed you, there isn't much Mother Nature on Union Pier or on the peninsula right now. So we are now recreating Mother Nature. Mother Nature maintains herself often. When you put people there, it needs to be maintained. So we had this discussion regarding Union Pier and the green infrastructure that was proposed by the port. What has to be done is if the drainage analysis assumes that that green infrastructure is going to take the first 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch of rain and manage it, that has to be maintained. Certainly when it's young, Mother Nature takes a while to get going, and it has to be maintained going forward. And you have to watch for compacted soils, because if the soil compacts, then the water runs off just like it's concrete. You've seen this perhaps in your yards. So that has to be maintained. It's really essential that we do this. It can help a lot, but it has to be maintained. It's not one and done build, right? They will submit recommendations to you all in writing, what they think should be done, what the challenges are, what should go where. They will give you a design framework for all the forces of water we talk about. And they will also support Robert Summerfield's team with the comprehensive plan amendment for the waterfront redevelopment district. That's what they're going to do. They will start their work. I don't have a notice yet, but we're already planning meetings. They're going to be here in early October. And we've already requested from the port the ability to get behind those fences. That's my update. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes. You mentioned dirt and sand, but you didn't mention fill. And that will obviously come into play with Union Pier, which is, as I understand it from the Lowe presentations, primarily fill. So I don't know how that fits into, from a technical perspective, everything that you were talking about.
So the forces, so those conditions, dirt and sand, or mud and sand, and fresh and salt water, those are what Mother Nature gave us.
Right.
Man just put, in our ultimate wisdom, we decided to put dirt where there used to be water, and it's fill, right? What we don't
We know it's
know,
dirt. It's
What's
probably, we know it wasn't dirt.
it's, well, yeah,
Some
could be other things mixed in there.
Yeah.
Bones.
Sorry, my train of thought, Winslow. No, so as with the Army Corps of Engineers project, and as with, I think, some of the limit analysis that was done by the low team, we don't know exactly what's under there, right? And we're gonna have to work through that. The water planning team will assume certain things about what's under there. Again, fill is fine if it's managed. Again, we live on fill, most of the, a third of the peninsula's fill, so we can do it. But you have to see what the quality of it is, and if you're excavating it, are you doing something unwise? That's the thing. So then that's the fill that's there. So the pier deck is above a lot of fill, right? Gatlinburg, it's a lot of fill. Now what the low team had proposed, and again, I know the Sherwood guys have known them for a long time, is they proposed elevating part of the structure for a number of purposes. And was that a good or bad idea? Elevation can help you manage runoff, because if it's very flat, the water has to be nudged along, or it's not going to just stay there. And if it has a little bit of gradient to it, the water will run off faster. Now, provided you've designed the catchments for that runoff so it can absorb heavy volumes of water, it's okay. But that's the engineering challenge that has to go along with when you have elevation in an area that's flat. You have to manage that.
So we want them to elevate the sides and let it all go in the middle. Just kidding.
Ideally, you could elevate, from Washington Street and have it just run off into the river, but that's, what about that wall we're talking about? So anyway, any other questions?
Dale, can you go back a couple of slides and you were talking about the phases of the perimeter going up? This one. And can you share a little bit more about the order of progress around the peninsula from west to east?
So right now, pretty much everything is negotiable, what we do when, besides this. So this is phase one of the pre-construction engineering and design phase, PED. Army Corps jargon, right? So PED. Phase one is from the bottom of the Citadel down to the Coast Guard station. That would then tie into the renovated high battery. So now you have a lot of the western part of the peninsula protected, design. And then once you finish your design for phase one of PED, you can construct if you have the authority from Congress, the funding from Congress, and the city's funding lined up to do that too. So you could be in the design phase and elsewhere, but constructing here. They're actually pondering that in Norfolk. They're almost finished with design up there for their phase one. They also have coincidentally a 4-phase project. Phase two is, right now, is the batteries. They're relatively easy. The low battery is mostly renovated. It's an easy lift to elevate that another 2.5 feet. That's all that it is for the renovated low battery, so it's not a big deal. And there are different ways you can do that. So that shouldn't take too long. Challenge is part of the high battery. We're not quite sure how structurally sound it is, so we're gonna have to do that. So that's phase two. Phase three is the east side. This is its entire long reach. And then phase four is Wagner Terrace. And you see here Wagner Terrace, this structure is in the water, which can be done. And the reason it's in the water is if we were gonna put it on land, we would have to take every waterfront home that was there. That'd been a taking complex. You can't do that. In the feasibility analysis, they say it is possible to sever Wagner Terrace from the Army Corps project, meaning we don't have to do it. There's a couple of dips in Rutledge up here that if we would just put a knee wall in those little dips, then the 12-foot top height elevation of the structure would be sound. But that's something we do last. That's clearly phase four. We may, however, like I said, phase one and make this phase two and this phase three and that phase four. That's up to us.
Dale, you mentioned that the first place we start is the conditions that Mother Nature gave us, right? One of the things that we haven't had a lot with Union Pier is kind of analysis of its original ecological condition at the time that we came here in the 1600s hundreds. So what relevance does that have to you? I mean, how instructive should that be where the deep water was originally on the site in terms of looking at a design for the
So-
future?
We know this was marsh, most of this was marsh before, and we just filled it in. You can just sort of sense how the near shore sort of drops off, and then we have this big navigation channel out there now. So we know it was marsh, could have been dry some of the times, so again, that is still what Mother Nature provided us. There is some structure there to the soil, there was, and we've just topped it over and we put things there, right? So it is still very important to understand what Mother Nature provided for us. Certainly for the entire citywide water plan, that's essential. For Union Pier, it's also essential to understand what's going on under there, right? It's really important. And again, if we're trying to think of a parkland feature that is the port proposed, parkland feature on the exterior, as you step down towards the water, you restore the marshes there, provided the shelf is at the appropriate water depth, or you nourish that with sediment to get it at the appropriate water. Those are things that can be done. So that's trying to understand that whole system, right? So I think it's very important.
Dale, if we could go back, please, maybe a couple of slides where you were talking about we will not have a gray wall, and you showed the step up here. The critical piece of that for our city as we are approaching funding sources is that is additional mitigation, not a betterment. So we have to take the time to show that this provides a better place for water to go versus just building the wall. So I think it's really critical, and I appreciate the fact that you're taking the time to study that around the perimeter so that the benefits are extended beyond just what we talked about at Union Pier and into the rest of the peninsula. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. Who wants a gray wall, right? No one wants it in the city of Charleston. I do think an ugly gray wall may be quite appropriate on Columbus Terminal, because you're gonna be using that in the next number of years, right? And it's not that high, right? It may be exactly what's appropriate there, but it's not appropriate for a, well-used urban context, right? So a bin wall, it may not be more expensive. They're designing this in Norfolk and they're finding the costs are relatively the same. Now, the extra decoration we put on it, that's called a betterment, and that's on us. But this is our city, so these are things that would be an additional cost, would be for the city to do. And the reason for that is, and I'm not one who often defends the Army Corps of Engineers, they're a tricky organization to deal with. But at the end of the day, the Army Corps has a mandate to provide flood protection or surge risk mitigation or tidal mitigation or rainfall mitigation, and that's their job. And if the local sponsor wants more, the local sponsor should pay for that. Because why should the folks in Oregon pay for the betterment of the beauty of the city of Charleston? This is all, you may not want to pay for the taxes for Oregon to do those things there, right? So this is a local responsibility, and that is reflected in the Army Corps of Engineers policy. Okay, there's some flexibility because we have a special MOU with them on aesthetic mitigation, so we got some extra money from them, and so maybe we can do this stuff at part of their expense. And we have another agreement with them on historic mitigation too, and Brian's quite familiar with that. So our project, this MOU I mentioned, it's the first of its kind in the nation that the Army Corps of Engineers has done. So they are trying to work very closely with us, understanding that this peninsula is really important to get right, that you just can't put up an ugly gray wall. Again, we have to go through the design phase, but that's it. But the essential thing is the elevated edge is going to be necessary around the peninsula and on Union Pier. So you can't do it without it.
Dale, is that an actual location picture there, or is it simulated?
That's just a design drawing from our city design division. So they had I'll give you a little bit of insight. You know that picture of the ugly gray wall on Broad and Lockwood that a city design division made? The Corps didn't make that. The city design division made that to show what an ugly gray wall would look like. And you will get that if you're not careful, right? And then sort of say, well, but it could be nicer, and this is what they're indicating.
Thank you.
Dale, we've been hearing for a while about the design agreement, and y'all been negotiating that, and I get it, that working with a big federal bureaucracy takes time. Can you give us any, and this is separate from the MOU, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. MOU is already
MOU 's
executed.
done.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's
So with this design agreement, which again is you all pushing the envelope, which is great, which will give us more flexibility to bring in our own experts to represent the city, correct?
Mhm.
Can you give us any indication of how those negotiations are going?
Yes, I could show you an email I just got today, but, so the design agreement, once the project is authorized by Congress to move into the design and construction phase, before you can start the design phase, you have to agree to do certain things, and that's the design agreement. The Army Corps of Engineers has a template contract that they put in front of the non-federal sponsor and says, please sign here, we got this. That's literally what happens, and that's what they like to happen, because it allows them to manage things, and that may be appropriate in some places. I don't wanna criticize that. For the city of Charleston and for other sort of complex urban environments, a non-federal sponsor has goals too. So that goes into the design agreement. So we have studied a number of other design agreements. There aren't many that have changes to it, but we've studied those. We worked honestly and directly with the Corps of Engineers from mid-spring until now, we're still underway, to tell them what we want in the design agreement. I have a draft, finally, just got it today, a draft of the design agreement that reflects a number of the key issues that we told them that need to go into the design agreement. So they're working towards us. I hope to be able to send them back a red line in the next 2 weeks if we need changes. And then we'll see. The design agreement that we have now would allow this to be approved at the division level. So, South Atlantic Division. Very important. That way we don't have to go to the ASA, the Assistant Secretary of the Army, or the ASA for Civil Works up in Washington. If we have to go to that level, we will. Barbara's familiar with having to talk to the ASA and all the folks at the upper levels of the Army Corps of Engineers. Sometimes it is important to force them to tell us no. Really, that's what this is going to be. If we have key things we need to get done with this project and we think we can, then we need to ask for it. So that's where we are. Hopefully we can do this with division level approval, but we've told the Corps that we'll go up the chain of command if we have to. And General Spellman, who's the 3-star general in charge of the Army Corps of Engineers, General Graham is his 2-star deputy, and General Hibner is the division commander in Atlanta right now. They have all been here over the last year looking around. Why are you guys fussing so much? And then they see the peninsula and then they understand why. So I think we're making good progress with them, but at the end of the day, the lawyers are gonna determine this. So,
They always do.
they always do.
James?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dale. Really enjoyed this and a lot of great information to take in here. Early on, when you were talking about the natural capital and you know what Mother Nature gives us on the peninsula, I think after that you talked about there are areas where you would encourage development because they're higher ground and make good sense not just now but for in the future. And then there are other areas where you would discourage it and say, perhaps you should do that somewhere else. If Union Pier didn't have the asphalt and the buildings on it now and the old pilings, and someone were to come and develop it, do you think that your department would encourage development on that area, or do you think that would be discouraged?
So that's the dangerous hypothetical, right? So, look, let me start here. So we know maybe this isn't a good place to build, right? So Laurel Island is okay in some spots, right? So this doesn't reflect, there's a lot of natural capital there because there's nothing there, right? But this area, these areas, we need to stay out of those places. The issue with Union Pier is it has been developed and it has been used and it is part of this urban fabric of the city. In my personal observation, right now, Union Pier is a blemish on the city. It's my personal observation. It is a piece of asphalt that is not utilized to the benefit of the city, and now it can be. And I just think if we're not gonna give it back, we're not gonna carve it out and tell Mother Nature to take it back. That's not gonna happen. I don't know who would pay for that. Right, so this is very important property close to downtown. There are things that can be done with this. We have to do this wisely, understanding the water risks that are there, as well as the other things that I don't get involved with, like transportation. So keep that in mind. I mean, I do think that this is such an urban environment already. I don't know that we should go back. But again, in other parts of the city, there are places where we know now, and the water comprehensive plan from the city tried to get at this, like this low and reserve category that we already have. Let's respect that and not build there if we can, if it's not already entitled. And we're gonna make those same recommendations. All right, so I just confused myself. The comprehensive plan, low and reserved. Let's not do things. One of the problems we have now is development takes quite long. Some of the things that have been entitled that we're working through now, maybe we wouldn't have entitled them in the same way had we known then what we know now. It is really in the last decade that we have had to come to terms with our sort of sea level rise, recurrent tide, increasing tidal risk, and the rain bonds. It is really 2014 or 2015 is a tipping point, and you see this around the United States. Something has changed, and you look at the 100 years of NOAA data, and you can see something changed, and the impacts they started to be felt in the city of Charleston around 2015. We had a relatively quiet period of no flooding or very little flooding, just nuisance flooding now and then something popped in 2015. So we have to work on those entitlements too. And they're entitled, we can't stop them. See if we can work with the developers to reflect the current conditions.
In the essence of time, we'll do one more question, and then we can always follow up with Dale later with more questions. So I think that's.
Agree, outstanding presentation, very informative. Two things I'm going to be asked. You're talking about the phases, phase 3, we have to live in the phase 3. All of this is gonna take time. Any ideas on when a phase 3 would actually take place? And then there's an awful lot of rumors going around on where the perimeter is or isn't. So you have a lot of people with agita, to use something from my heritage, on are they gonna be in or gonna be out?
Right.
So phase 3 timeline perhaps, and what can you maybe add to put some of their minds at ease?
So we anticipate phase 1 design to take 2 years, maybe 2.5 years. That is, subject to revision, right? You just don't know. We're gonna dig around and whoops, it's pretty easy. We just don't know yet. So that's one thing. So the physical conditions are the impact the design timeline. Another thing that's going to impact the design timeline is this flexibility we're demanding in design from the Army Corps of Engineers. We're going to have to see how collaborative they are. 2 to 2.5 years. My feeling is we should skip over to the east side right after that, and then do the batteries in phase 3. That would be my intention. I think you're looking at design 2026, 2027, 2028. Again, you have 3 distinct areas. So this area, and then this area on the east side. And again, part of the challenge here, again, just north of Union Pier is the Gatzenburg, the museums, dockside, the condos. That's a tricky area because the Army Corps of Engineers moved the line of protection closer to the land water edge for the port. And that was a smart thing to do because prior to that, it was the line of protection was inside the port properties. But by moving it that way, they have now put the line down Concord Street. Whether that is the ideal place for it, we just don't know yet. Again, this entire study was $3 million. It's not a lot of money to do this kind of work. So there's a lot of flexibility that comes in the design phase.
Thank you, Dale.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate your time. I think we'll be seeing a lot of each other over the next year, all of us, so. Let's see. I want to apologize because not only did I mispronounce our fabulous planning director, Robert Summerfield's last name, as I unfortunately tend to do. Apologies, Robert. I forgot to introduce myself. I know everybody in the room knows me, but I'm Kendra Stewart, a faculty member at the College of Charleston and director of the Riley Center. And I'm going to now bring up my colleague. Stop for a second, I gotta reshare this presentation. Is that? Bob O'Neill, who is an executive in residence at the Riley Center. And he is going to start by talking about the timeline.
So just to keep you up to date as best we can, and you can imagine, as we mentioned at the last meeting, we're putting together this timeline in real time. And so there is lots of things that we have been working on since we last talked to you. And that, I'm gonna go ahead and do this, just to save time.
That's how fast we'll be moving.
Maybe.
Okay, we're done.
Yeah, so what we try to do is put it in blocks of time. We have modified some of the material that you saw at the last meeting after conversations with Dale, for instance, on the schedule for the water plan, and with Robert on the Peninsula District and the comp plan, because what we're trying to do, and this is gonna be a very fine line, is to move this along as quickly as we can, but doing it in the sequence that's gonna be necessary to get to the end of the day where we have approval. So we want to be framed by the comp plan, we want to be framed by the water plan, and those things ought to drive the discussions on the Union Pier site. So it's a very tight timeline to start with, but we're trying to make sure we get the sequencing right. And Robert and his team and Dale and his team have been very helpful in trying to give us sort of their schedule so that we can sort of work through this. So some of this I think will change as we go through this, as the actual work plans are in play. That's been, I think one can probably experience just from Dale's presentation, the complexity of the work that's gonna go on. And having waded through some of the files that Barbara was kind enough to send over from the Low project, there's a lot of information that's gonna have to be assimilated to determine what is valuable to keep as part of the process that we're gonna go through, and what is that we've gotta, in essence, go from scratch. So this is the timeline we've talked about, the kinds of things we're gonna do in the fall. Obviously, the key one right now is we wanna get the consulting team on board as quickly as we can. Gonna work with the comp plan amendment engagement process, which is gonna begin, and then hopefully start then the Union Pier. So if you think about this from the beginning of sort of Robert's 10,000 foot metaphor, we're gonna try to drive pretty quickly from the 10,000 feet down to the site, right? So it's gonna be a lot of public engagement sequentially, we hope, around the issues that are gonna be necessary to get us to the detail that you want to get to at the end of the day, which is a pretty specific plan unit development that will go to the council next summer. Dale talked about the water plan schedule. What Robert had indicated to us is sometime spring for the comprehensive plan engagement process, and then we're gonna start then working through the detail on the Union Pier plan down to the specifics of the plan unit development. Summer and at least in our world, summer is now all the way to midnight of September 21st. So, I mean, we're stretching summer as far as we can stretch it here. Any questions? This is very similar. We've changed a little bit of the sequence based on the water plan and the comp plan schedules, but otherwise the sequencing is pretty much the same. And I've got some detailed stuff, we'll deal with it probably later, that have to do with some of the contractual stuff part of this. So some of the questions may get covered as we get through the contractual things. Yes, ma'am.
If you advance, there's
Oh.
the next.
Sorry. Dave?
I was just gonna ask, when do you envision the city approving the comp plan amendment?
That's probably a question for Robert or Dale or
So Faith, we're anticipating at the latest a spring adoption for the comp plan amendment. Now we're gonna have drafts that we're gonna be sharing, and that I think the team that you all select to do the new or updated PUD can use as kind of the jumping off point. We'll have that, earlier in the year after the new year, but we anticipate getting through the council process all the way, from planning commission and the hearing and the 3 reads at council by spring.
Thank you.
so as Robert's describing, so we're gonna try to just be slightly behind every one of those steps. So the more information we get early, we can start to shape the work and the scope of work that we're gonna have with the consultant team that we'll hire. So hopefully those things are all gonna fit pretty nicely together. We hope. Any other questions? So the next piece is just is the consultant selection process. And again, like Dale's team, this is probably gonna be a multi-firm sort of set of actors. So it'll probably be more than one firm. We'll probably have obviously a lead firm in terms of the process. We expect the proposals to be in Friday the 22nd, and we'll begin that review process pretty quickly. This is the criteria that we had selected for them for the process that we'll use for the selection of the consulting team. And we're hopeful. We've gotten a number of contacts already. I don't expect to get 10 proposals, but I expect certainly we're gonna get more than one. So we will have a process that we'll have to go through in terms of the selection process using these criteria. Any questions? Don't have much information until we actually see it.
Who will make that decision?
If we can wait for the executive session to talk about that contractual negotiation, and we'll sort of brief you on how we think that ought to work. Yes.
The question relates to sort of the scope of work of the team we're looking for. The actual assembly of the PUD language itself, is that done internally by court's attorneys, or is that the expectation of the planning firm?
Well, there'll be attorneys involved at the end, but the expectation and the scope of work that we have is that to be the meat of the plan unit development will come out of this process.
Thank you, Bob.
And Kendra, just one piece of information. So the water plan team's work for Union Pier should be finished by the end of the year. So we gave them a 3-month time frame. So you all and the planning consultant will not have to guess at what they recommended next spring. It'll be done.
Thank you.
And are they able to start pretty quickly? I mean, I know it takes a little time to mobilize, but
They're
City
looking
council
here
voted on
October,
Tuesday.
they're ready to go October 4th. We're gonna walk the pier, so.
At this point, we're gonna end the public part of the meeting. I want to thank people who joined us online. I know there was not an opportunity to provide public comment at this point, but we will have future meetings where that is the case. And I also encourage you to sign up on the Union Pier website if you'd like to receive more information, or reach out to me at the Riley Center, and you can find my information online at riley.cfc.edu. At this point, we'll go into executive session for discussion of negotiations incident.
You need to make a motion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I have to apologize. I have to ask for a motion that we move into executive session from somebody on the committee.
I second the motion.
All in favor?
State the purposes.
And the purpose of going into executive session will be discussion of negotiations incident, proposed contractual arrangements, and proposed purchase lease of property.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We are back out of executive session, and there was no action taken in executive session. And there is nothing else to report out for tonight. So thank you all for joining, and we will see everyone at the next meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor? Thank you, guys. Good night.